Cobus, there is a lot going on this week. In fact, more than we can talk about in today's show, but three very big stories that we've been covering at CGSP quite closely. First and foremost, the war between Israel and Iran. We dedicated our Monday edition of the newsletter to China's role in this. Very interesting, Cobus, that in this conflict, China came out very quickly and did not pretend to try and be a neutral arbiter, did not pretend to be kind of nonpartisan at all. They came out very quickly, backed Iran on this, framed the Israelis as the aggressor, and then also positioned the United States as manipulating all of this, which is par for the course in a lot of these types of incidents. We're also following another very, very big story. Xi Jinping arrived in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan this week for the China plus the Central Asia 5 summit, the C plus C5 summit. He also had a bilateral on Monday with the president of Kazakhstan, and we provided coverage on that. And finally, Cobus, I want to get your take on a very big event that took place in the Hunan capital, which is the central Chinese province of Hunan, Changsha. And there is I think it's the fourth China-Africa Trade Expo that's underway. And again, the symbolism of this trade expo comes at a time when the United States now is proposing to add dozens more countries, many from Africa, to the no travel ban. The U.S. Congress formalized the end of PEPFAR and a number of these aid programs. So two very divergent directions that the United States and China are going in. But all three are big stories that have been on the radar for us this week.
Yeah, the Trade Expo in Changsha is big. Like they signed about $11.4 billion worth of deals, like around 170 deals. And a bunch of deals and letters of intent and so on the side as well. Also, like a lot of high-level ministerial meetings. So Wang Yi was there, and he was meeting people left and right. So it's very interesting to see. As you say, it's happening on the back of a possible travel ban and on U.S. plans for a possible leaders summit in I think September, which is going to be with a travel ban. Will say the Nigerian president be even allowed into the country? Let's see.
Well, I mean, it's just there's such a different tone between what the U.S. and what the Chinese are doing. Again, we're not going to take a side on which one's better because the United States says they're launching a new Africa strategy that's more transaction-based, that's focused on deals. Yet the irony, as you're pointing out, is the new U.S. policy looks a lot like the old Chinese policy, and we just seen that on full display in Changsha this week. What's your take on the situation between Iran and Israel? And one of the things that I wrote about on Monday is the stakes for China are exceedingly high in this conflict. And I think a lot of people may not fully appreciate how over the past 15 years, there has been this steady shift away from Africa towards the Persian Gulf for Chinese oil buying, to the point now where about a third to 45%, again, the numbers vary quite a bit, of Chinese imported energy passes through the Strait of Hormuz and comes from Persian Gulf countries. A lot of that's from the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis, and of course, Iran as well. If Iran does follow through with its threat, unlikely as it may be, but if it does follow through on its threat to shut the Strait of Hormuz, that would have an immediate impact on Chinese industry that relies on imported energy. And so not only in the diplomatic realm where China's coming out so strongly in favor of Iran, but also there are very steep economic consequences for the Chinese.
Those consequences make me wonder whether Iran will try and hold back on that as long as they can, because of course it would directly hit their own trade with China as well. But all of this, I think it is interesting to see Xi Jinping's visit to Central Asia in the context of the Iran-Israel war, because of course Turkmenistan, one of the C5 countries, shares a border with Iran. So this Central Asian kind of coordination, economic coordination, also comes against the background of overland, massive kind of logistics corridors that are being built exactly to avoid this Strait of Hormuz dilemma that China faces in the broader landscape. So there's this like economic integration happening between China and Central Asia, but also I think a certain amount of security colored hedging. I think that's happening not only in relation to Israel and Iran, but also in relation to other kind of security issues on the other side of that same zone, for example, between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. So China's outreach to Central Asia has this double kind of economic security kind of valence at a moment when it's also trying to increase some of its influence in the area as Russia's influence is shifting and kind of distracted.
And it's interesting that you bring up how these issues between Central Asia and the Persian Gulf touch on each other and overlap. We saw some discord earlier this week within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the SCO, if you're not familiar with it, is one of these groups that the Chinese initiated along with the Russians in order to challenge, counter U.S.-led international organizations and the U.S.-led international order. So put this in the category with the BRICS, also the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the New Development Bank. This is all part of this new emerging parallel international governance architecture. Well, these groups are all operating on a consensus basis. So that is, they never publish a statement or a communique unless all of the members sign on to it. That is the claim, and that's really a foundational difference between these groups and what the Chinese will accuse the United States of engaging in unilateralism, okay? So it was very interesting over the weekend that the SCO issued a statement condemning Israel for the missile attacks on Iran. But the Indians were not part of that discussion. Now, remember, Pakistan is part of the SCO, and so is Iran and obviously China. And so the Indians, issued a very rare statement that said, listen, guys, we were not part of this statement. This was not appropriate at all. And I thought that was very interesting, Cobus, that these groups like BRICS and the SCO are now starting to show some growing pains. And we saw some discord within the BRICS over some of the Africa decisions that were going to be made. And again, lots of African members within the BRICS. And now we've seen this flare-up of tensions over the statement on Israel. So just an interesting data point to follow in these emerging groups that are trying to challenge the U.S.-led international system.
Yeah, I think one factor is an ongoing long-term relationship between India and Israel specifically. That is a very interesting dynamic. That I don't know enough about personally, but that has been going on, and of course then the larger historical tensions between India and Pakistan are obviously at play. Overall, I think these bodies are. This is an interesting inflection point, I think, for these bodies. Overall, a body like BRICS, for example, has functioned they've gotten a lot of mileage out of member states being able to put these ongoing beefs between them kind of to the side, and then using BRICS as a space for other kinds of coordination. And I think it's been quite successful in that way. But there's obviously a limit to how far that can go. So it's going to be interesting to see whether it and other similar organizations is going to have to find some form of mediation mechanism or something to kind of work out some of these disputes at some stage.
And it's not going to get easier as these groups get bigger. So Vietnam last week was admitted as a partner country to the BRICS. Wonderful for Vietnam. We now have 4 Southeast Asian countries in the BRICS. I think it's Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and now Vietnam. But again, as things get bigger, there are more complicated politics. And in some ways, Cobus, it reminds me of how an opposition party is used to sitting in the backbench of parliament, kind of throwing darts at the incumbent leadership. And then all of a sudden, that opposition becomes the administration, and they gain power. And then governing is very different than serving as an opposition. So in some ways, these groups are starting to move into the forefront, challenged by major real world issues that have consequences to them, like the Iran-Israel conflict. And these are difficult things, but finding that consensus is going to be, I think, more challenging, not less, as groups get larger.